What would you do if your 8-year-old came home from school one day and suddenly stopped smiling? Leo Martinez was the kind of kid teachers usually loved. You know the type. The one whose hand shot up first when someone asked a question. The one who actually got excited about homework. The one who'd choose reading time over recess if you let him. At 8 years old, Leo had this brightness about him, this spark in his dark brown eyes that said the world was full of possibilities, and he wanted to discover every single one of them. Maplewood Elementary sat on the corner of Oak and 3rd Street, a cheerful brick building with colorful murals painted by students from years past. Leo had been going there since kindergarten, and he knew every corner of that school. He knew which water fountain had the coldest water. He knew where the sunlight came through the library windows at exactly 2:15, making dust particles dance like tiny stars. He knew the smell of the cafeteria on Pizza Friday, and the sound the gym floor made when you ran across it in sneakers. But what Leo loved most about school was learning new things. And his favorite subject? History. There was something magical to him about stories from the past, about people who did brave things, who changed the world, who stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. So when Ms. Granger, his 3rd grade teacher, announced the special history essay assignment, Leo's whole face lit up. "Class," Ms. Granger had said, her voice carrying that particular tone teachers use when they think they're giving you something special. "You're going to research and write about a person who made a difference in history. Someone who changed things for the better. You have 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like forever to Leo. It felt like enough time to make something really good. Something that would make Ms. Granger proud. Something that would make his parents proud. Something that would maybe, just maybe, get hung up on the outstanding work bulletin board outside the principal's office. That evening, Leo burst through the front door of his family's small but cozy home with more energy than usual, which was saying something for a kid who already had energy to spare. "Dad! Dad!" he called out, dropping his backpack by the door in a way that would normally get him a gentle reminder about the coat hooks. "We get to write about someone who changed history." Daniel Martinez looked up from his laptop at the kitchen table, papers spread around him like always. As a civil rights lawyer, he brought work home most nights, but he always had time for Leo. Always. He closed the laptop and smiled at his son. "That's exciting, buddy. Who are you thinking about?" Leo climbed onto the chair across from his father, his legs swinging back and forth beneath him. "I don't know yet. There are so many people. Ms. Granger said we could pick anyone. George Washington or Benjamin Franklin or... I want to pick someone really cool. Someone brave." Maria Martinez emerged from the hallway, still in her nursing scrubs from the hospital. She'd heard the excitement in her son's voice from the bedroom where she'd been changing. She ruffled Leo's hair as she passed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Someone brave, huh?" she said. "That's a big category, Mijo." Over dinner that night, the three of them talked about heroes. Daniel told stories about the people he'd learned about in law school, the ones who'd fought for justice when the law itself was unjust. Maria talked about medical pioneers who'd saved lives when everyone said it was impossible. And Leo listened, his eyes getting wider and wider, his mind filling up with possibilities. It was Daniel who suggested it, almost casually, as he cleared the plates. "You know, Leo, if you're interested, we could go to the library this weekend. Look at some books about the civil rights movement. There were so many brave people then. People who stood up when it was really, really hard to stand up." Leo's eyes lit up. "Like Martin Luther King Jr.? Like him, yes. And Rosa Parks and John Lewis and Ruby Bridges, who was only a little older than you when she did something incredibly brave. And so many others whose names don't get mentioned as much, but who were just as important." And that was it. That was the moment Leo found his topic. He wanted to write about the people who fought for civil rights, who believed that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. It felt important. It felt right. That Saturday, Daniel and Leo spent 4 hours at the Maplewood Public Library. For hours that felt like minutes to Leo. He pulled book after book from the shelves, carefully turning pages, reading passages out loud to his dad. Daniel watched his son with quiet pride, seeing himself in Leo's careful note-taking, in the way he wanted to get every detail right. "Dad, listen to this," Leo would say every few minutes, reading another quote, another story, another moment of courage that had happened decades before he was born. They checked out a stack of books so tall that Leo could barely see over it when he carried it to the circulation desk. The librarian, Mrs. Chun, smiled at them. She knew Leo. He was there almost every week. "Big project?" she asked. The biggest, Leo said seriously. I'm writing about heroes. Over the next week and a half, Leo worked on that essay like nothing else mattered. Every afternoon after school, he'd spread his materials out on the kitchen table. Books, notebook paper, colored pencils for marking important passages. Maria would come home from her shifts and find him there, so focused he barely looked up to say hello. Daniel would check his work, help him understand the bigger words, make sure his facts were right. Remember, buddy, Daniel told him one evening, it's not just about listing facts. It's about telling the story. It's about helping people understand why this matters. Leo nodded seriously, chewing on the end of his pencil. I want people to feel it, Dad. I want them to understand how brave these people were. He rewrote his introduction 3 times. He checked his spelling twice. He even asked his mom to read it out loud to him, so he could hear how it sounded. And when he finally finished, the night before it was due, he held up the 5 handwritten pages with a sense of accomplishment he'd never felt before. It's good, isn't it? He asked his parents, needing their reassurance. Maria hugged him tight. It's better than good, baby. It's wonderful. Daniel put his hand on Leo's shoulder, the way he did when he wanted Leo to really hear him. I'm proud of you, son. Not just because the essay is good, but because of how hard you worked. That matters more than anything. Leo went to bed that night with his essay carefully tucked into a folder, then placed in the front pocket of his backpack. He was so excited he could barely sleep. He kept imagining Ms. Granger's face when she read it. He kept imagining the gold star she might put at the top. Maybe she'd even read part of it to the class as an example. The thought made his stomach flutter with nervous excitement. The next morning, Leo practically ran to school. He was one of the first students to arrive in Ms. Granger's classroom, and he carefully placed his essay in the wooden basket on her desk marked, "Turn in here." He looked at it one more time before walking away, that neat folder with his name written on it in his best handwriting. Leo Martinez, room 3B. The next week passed slowly. Ms. Granger had said she needed time to read everyone's essays carefully, to give them all the attention they deserved. Leo watched that basket every day, watched it slowly empty as she worked through the stack. He wondered what she thought of his. He wondered if she was impressed. He wondered if she understood why he'd chosen this topic, why these stories mattered to him. Finally, on a Tuesday morning that started out like any other Tuesday morning, Ms. Granger stood at the front of the classroom with the basket full of graded essays. "Good morning, class," she said in her crisp voice. "I finished reading your history essays, and I must say, most of you did a very nice job. I'm going to hand them back now, and we'll spend some time this afternoon discussing what we learned." Leo's heart started beating faster. This was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Ms. Granger walked up and down the rows, placing essays on desks. Leo watched other students react to their grades. Sarah got an A and smiled. Marcus got a B+ and shrugged. Emma got an A and looked pleased. When Ms. Granger reached Leo's desk, she placed his folder down without a word. No smile. No comment. Nothing. Just the folder. And then she moved on to the next student. Leo's hands were shaking slightly as he opened the folder. He told himself he was being silly, that everything was fine, that the silence didn't mean anything. But when he saw the paper, when he saw what was written across the top in red ink, everything inside him went cold. There was no grade, no gold star, no encouraging comment about his hard work. Instead, there was a single sentence written in Ms. Granger's handwriting, words that would burn themselves into Leo's memory forever. Words so cruel and so racist that they shattered something fundamental in his 8-year-old heart. The words are too painful to repeat here, but they were the kind of words that told Leo his teacher didn't see him as a bright, eager student who'd worked hard. She saw something else entirely. Something about his race, his family, his worth as a human being. Words that made Leo feel like all his effort, all his care, all his love for learning meant nothing because of the color of his skin. Leo stared at those words. He read them once, twice, 3 times. Maybe if he read them again, they'd say something different. Maybe he'd misunderstood. But no, the meaning was clear. Brutally, heartbreakingly clear. His chest felt tight. His eyes started to burn, but he blinked hard because he couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. He looked up at Ms. Granger, who was now back at her desk, and she wasn't even looking at him. She was organizing papers like this was just another day. Like she hadn't just written words that made an 8-year-old boy feel worthless. Leo's hands moved automatically. He closed the folder. Quickly, quietly, he shoved it deep into his backpack, underneath his lunch box, underneath his library book, underneath everything. Hidden. Secret. Gone. He sat through the rest of the day in a fog. When Ms. Granger asked questions, his hand didn't go up. When it was time for reading groups, he stared at the pages without seeing them. When his friend Marcus asked him at lunch if he was okay, Leo just nodded and said his stomach hurt, which wasn't a lie. His whole body hurt. That afternoon, Maria noticed something was wrong the second Leo walked through the door. He didn't burst in with his usual energy. He didn't call out for his dad. He just came in quietly, went straight to his room, and closed the door. Maria followed him, knocked gently. "Leo, baby, are you feeling okay?" "My stomach hurts," Leo said through the door. "I just want to lie down." It wasn't like Leo to want to be alone. It wasn't like him to be quiet. But Maria thought maybe he was coming down with something. Kids got sick. It happened. She brought him some crackers and ginger ale, felt his forehead for fever, and let him rest. But Leo wasn't sick. Not in the way his mother thought. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, and something that had been bright inside him started to dim. He thought about his essay, about how proud he'd been, about how hard he'd worked. He thought about the library with his dad, about the stories of brave people who'd stood up to injustice. And now his teacher, the person who was supposed to encourage him, support him, help him learn, she'd written words that made him feel small. Unwanted. Wrong. The worst part was the confusion. Leo was 8. He couldn't fully understand the weight of racism, the history behind it, the systems that supported it. He just knew that his teacher had hurt him in a way that felt different from getting a bad grade. This felt personal. This felt like she'd looked at him and decided he was less than other students. And he didn't know why. He didn't know what he'd done wrong. That night at dinner, Leo barely ate. Daniel and Maria exchanged worried glances across the table. "Did something happen at school today, buddy?" Daniel asked gently. Leo shook his head. "Just tired." It was the first time Leo had ever really lied to his parents. The next few days followed the same pattern. Leo would get up for school, but the excitement was gone. The spark was gone. He'd come home, go to his room, do his homework mechanically. When Maria asked how school was, he'd say fine in a voice that meant anything but fine. A week passed. Then another. Leo, who used to love raising his hand, who used to bounce in his seat with enthusiasm, now sat quiet and still in Ms. Granger's classroom. His grades stayed good because he was smart and he tried, but the joy was gone. The confidence was crumbling. And that essay, that carefully researched, lovingly written essay about heroes and courage and standing up for what's right, stayed crumpled at the bottom of his backpack, hidden away like a terrible secret. Every day he meant to throw it away. Every day he couldn't quite bring himself to do it. It was evidence of something, though he couldn't have explained what. He just knew that his world had changed. His teacher, the adult he was supposed to trust, had looked at his best work and responded with cruelty. And 8-year-old Leo Martinez, who used to believe that working hard and being good was enough, was learning a much harder lesson. He was learning that sometimes the world isn't fair. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, some people will never see your worth. It was a lesson no child should have to learn. But Leo was learning it anyway, carrying that pain silently, his bright spark dimming a little more each day. What Leo didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that his mother was about to discover his secret. And when she did, everything was going to change. Maria Martinez had always been organized. As a nurse working 12-hour shifts at County General Hospital, she had to be. Everything had its place, everything ran on schedule, and that included making sure Leo had what he needed for school. So on a Sunday afternoon in late October, she was doing what she did every weekend. Going through Leo's backpack, checking for papers that needed to be signed, washing out the lunch box, making sure nothing had gotten lost or forgotten in the chaos of the school week. She unzipped the main compartment and started pulling things out. A math worksheet with a gold star. A permission slip for the upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. A crumpled napkin. Some broken crayons. And then, at the very bottom, underneath everything else, she felt something wedged tight. A folder. Maria pulled it out, frowning slightly. It was bent at the corners, like it had been shoved in there without care, which wasn't like Leo at all. He was usually so careful with his schoolwork. She opened the folder, expecting maybe an old assignment he'd forgotten to show them. What she found instead made her freeze. 5 pages of Leo's neat handwriting. His history essay, the one he'd worked so hard on, the one he'd been so excited about, the one she and Daniel had been so proud of. She started reading, remembering how carefully Leo had chosen each word, how he'd wanted to tell the story just right. And then she saw it, the red ink across the top, the words that made her stomach drop and her hands start shaking. Maria read it once, then again, then a third time, because surely she was misunderstanding. Surely no teacher, no adult trusted with children, would write something so vile, so racist, so deliberately cruel to an 8-year-old child. But there it was, in Ms. Granger's handwriting. Undeniable. "Daniel," Maria called out, her voice strange and tight. "Daniel, I need you to come here right now." Daniel had been in the garage, organizing some old boxes. He heard something in his wife's voice that made him drop what he was doing and come immediately. When he walked into the kitchen, Maria was standing there, holding papers in trembling hands, tears running down her face. "What's wrong? What happened?" He moved toward her quickly, concerned. Without a word, Maria handed him the essay. She watched his face as he read it. Watched confusion turn to shock, turn to anger. Daniel Martinez had spent his entire career fighting injustice, defending people whose rights had been violated, standing up in courtrooms and speaking truth to power. But this was different. This was his son. This was his 8-year-old boy who'd worked so hard, who'd been so proud, who'd come home that day 2 weeks ago and stopped smiling. When did this happen? Daniel's voice was low, controlled, but Maria could hear the fury underneath. "I don't know. 2 weeks ago, maybe? 3. Daniel, Leo hid this from us. He's been carrying this alone." They looked at each other, and in that moment, so many things suddenly made sense. Leo's stomachaches before school, his silence at dinner, the way his light had dimmed, the way their bright, enthusiastic boy had become quiet and withdrawn. He hadn't been getting sick. He'd been hurting, and he'd been too ashamed, too confused, too hurt to tell them. "Where is he?" Daniel asked. "At Marcus's house. The birthday party. We're supposed to pick him up at 5. Daniel looked at the clock. "They had an hour. We need to talk to him. We need to let him know this isn't his fault. Maria, we need to make this right." Maria nodded, wiping her tears. The nurse in her, the part that dealt with crisis and trauma every day at work, clicked into place. "We will. But Daniel, that teacher." "I know," he said quietly. "Trust me, I know." When they picked Leo up from the party, he was subdued even there, even surrounded by friends and cake and games. In the car on the way home, Daniel caught his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Hey, buddy. When we get home, Mom and I need to talk to you about something, okay? You're not in trouble. We just need to talk." Leo's face went pale. He knew. Somehow, he knew they'd found the essay. Back at home, the three of them sat in the living room. Leo on the couch, small and scared, his parents on either side of him. Maria held the folder in her lap, and when Leo saw it, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Oh, baby, no." Maria pulled him close. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Do you understand me?" "But Ms. Granger said, the things she wrote, maybe my essay was bad. Maybe I—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was firm but gentle. He knelt down in front of Leo, taking his son's small hands in his. "Leo, look at me. What Ms. Granger wrote was wrong. Not just wrong. It was cruel, and it was racist, and it was absolutely unacceptable. Your essay was excellent. You worked so hard on it. You should have been praised for it, celebrated for it. What she wrote had nothing to do with your work, and everything to do with her own prejudice and ignorance." "But why?" Leo's voice broke. "Why did she say those things? What did I do wrong?" Maria felt her heart shatter. This was what racism did. It made innocent children think they'd done something to deserve cruelty. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mijo. Not one single thing. What she did says everything about her and nothing about you. Why didn't you tell us?" Daniel asked softly. "Why did you hide this?" Leo's tears flowed freely now. "I was embarrassed. I thought maybe I was supposed to know better. Maybe I wasn't supposed to write about those people. Maybe I wasn't supposed to." He couldn't finish. "Listen to me very carefully," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice that made Leo look up. "You have every right to write about civil rights leaders, about people who looked like you and fought for dignity and justice. You have every right to be proud of your heritage, your history, your identity. And any teacher who tries to make you feel otherwise is not just wrong. They're violating every principle of what education is supposed to be." "What happens now?" Leo asked in a small voice. Daniel and Maria looked at each other. Now, Daniel said, we stand up. Together. We make sure this never happens to you or any other student again. The next morning, Monday, Daniel called the school before the first bell even rang. He identified himself to the secretary, asked for an immediate meeting with Principal Thompson. There was something in his tone, calm but absolutely immovable, that made the secretary understand this wasn't optional. Mr. Martinez, the principal's schedule is quite full today. Then unfill it, Daniel said quietly. My wife and I will be there at 9 o'clock. This cannot wait. At exactly 9 a.m., Daniel and Maria walked through the doors of Maplewood Elementary. Daniel carried a briefcase. Inside was Leo's essay, copies of it, and documentation he'd already begun preparing. Maria walked beside him, still in her scrubs because she'd come directly from a night shift. She was exhausted, but you wouldn't have known it from the steel in her spine. Principal Richard Thompson was a man in his late 50s who'd been running Maplewood Elementary for almost a decade. He prided himself on keeping things running smoothly, avoiding controversy, maintaining a good relationship with the community. When his secretary told him that Daniel Martinez, the civil rights attorney Daniel Martinez, was demanding an immediate meeting about a teacher incident, he felt a cold sense of dread. When Daniel and Maria entered his office, Thompson stood up, hand extended, smile practiced. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, please sit down. I understand there's some concern about. Principal Thompson, Daniel interrupted, his voice professional but hard. I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here because one of your teachers wrote this on my son's essay. He placed the paper on the principal's desk. Thompson picked it up. Read it. His face went from professional concern to genuine shock. This can't be. It is, Maria said. That's my son's handwriting on the essay. That's your teacher's handwriting in red ink at the top. My 8-year-old son has been carrying this pain for 3 weeks, and we only found out yesterday. Thompson read the essay itself, then read the comment again. He set it down carefully, his hands not quite steady. This is completely unacceptable. I don't even know what to say. Ms. Granger has been with us for 15 years. I don't care if she's been here for 50 years, Daniel said, and now the lawyer in him emerged fully. What I care about is that she wrote a racist comment on a child's schoolwork and thought that was acceptable. I care that my son, who loves learning, who works harder than any 8-year-old should have to work, now associates school with shame and pain. I care that if this happened to Leo, it may well have happened to other students. I assure you, we take any allegation of this nature extremely seriously. This isn't an allegation. Daniel's voice was sharp. This is documented evidence of racial discrimination by a school employee against a minor child. As an attorney who specializes in civil rights law, I can tell you exactly what this constitutes legally. As a father, I can tell you what it's done to my son. Principal Thompson swallowed hard. He was smart enough to know he was in serious trouble, that the school was in serious trouble. What do you want to happen here? I want my son to feel safe at school again, Maria said, her voice breaking slightly. I want him to love learning again. I want him to know that what happened to him was wrong, and that there are consequences when adults abuse their power. There will be an investigation, Thompson said quickly. I'll place Ms. Granger on immediate administrative leave pending. No, Daniel leaned forward. You don't understand. This isn't a situation that calls for an investigation to determine if something inappropriate happened. Something inappropriate absolutely, definitively happened. We have the evidence right there on that desk. What needs to happen now is accountability. Real accountability. Ms. Granger should be terminated. Mr. Martinez, I understand you're angry, but teacher termination is a process. There are union contracts, due process. And there are laws protecting children from discrimination, Daniel said quietly. There's Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. There are state education codes. There's a child's right to learn in an environment free from racial harassment. I know those laws intimately, Principal Thompson. I've built my career on them. And if necessary, I will use every single one of them to ensure my son and every other child in this school is protected. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thompson understood perfectly what was being said. This wasn't just a concerned parent. This was a civil rights attorney who knew exactly how to hold institutions accountable, who had the knowledge, the resources, and clearly the determination to follow through. I'll need to call Ms. Granger in, Thompson said slowly. She should have the opportunity to address this. Fine, Maria said. We'll wait. 20 minutes later, Ms. Granger walked into the principal's office. She looked confused, slightly annoyed at being pulled from her classroom mid-morning. When she saw the Martinezes sitting there, something flickered across her face. Not quite guilt, but recognition. She knew why they were there. "Have a seat, please," Principal Thompson said. His voice had none of its earlier warmth. He slid Leo's essay across the desk to her. "Do you remember writing this comment?" Ms. Granger picked up the paper. Read what she'd written. And in that moment, Daniel and Maria watched her make a calculation. She could have apologized. She could have shown remorse, could have acknowledged the terrible things she'd done. Instead, she got defensive. "I don't understand what the problem is," she said stiffly. "I have every right to grade my students' work as I see fit. If Leo was offended by my feedback." "If Leo was offended?" Maria's voice was dangerously quiet. "Ms. Granger, you wrote a racist slur on an 8-year-old child's homework. You didn't critique his writing. You didn't offer constructive feedback. You attacked him personally based on his race." "I don't appreciate being called a racist," Ms. Granger said, her face flushing. "I've taught children of all backgrounds for 15 years. And yet you wrote this." Daniel tapped the paper. These words. On a child's homework. A child who worked incredibly hard, who did thorough research, who wrote a thoughtful essay about civil rights leaders. And your response was to demean him with language that has no place in any classroom, let alone on a graded assignment. "I think you're overreacting," Ms. Granger said, but her voice wavered slightly. "It was a comment on his work, not on him personally." "Don't." Daniel's single word cut through the air. "Don't insult our intelligence by pretending that comment was anything other than what it was. And don't insult this profession by suggesting that what you did falls anywhere within the realm of acceptable teaching practice." Principal Thompson had been silent, watching. Now he spoke, and his voice was cold. "Ms. Granger, I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave while we conduct a formal review of this incident. You need to gather your personal belongings and leave campus today. HR will be in contact with you about next steps." Ms. Granger's face went white. "You can't be serious. Over one comment? The union will never allow." "The union will see the evidence," Thompson said. "The same evidence we're looking at right now. And I suspect they'll understand, as I do, that this is not defensible." Ms. Granger looked at Maria and Daniel, and for just a moment, they saw something ugly in her expression. Not remorse. Resentment. She was angry at being caught, being held accountable. She stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, but she left the office. After she was gone, Thompson let out a long breath. "I apologize on behalf of Maplewood Elementary for what your son experienced. It should never have happened." "An apology isn't enough," Maria said. "Our son needs support. He needs to know that school is a safe place again. He needs a teacher who will nurture his love of learning, not crush it." "I'll personally ensure he's placed with one of our best teachers," Thompson said. "Ms. Flores, who teaches the other third-grade class, is exceptional. She's warm, encouraging, and has a gift for connecting with students. I'll make the transition as smooth as possible." Daniel nodded slowly. "And the termination? Given the severity of the incident and the documented evidence, I'll be recommending termination to the school board. I can't guarantee the timeline, but I want you to know this is being taken seriously." "We'll be watching," Daniel said quietly. "And if necessary, we'll take further action." That evening, Daniel and Maria sat down with Leo again. They told him what had happened, what would happen. They watched relief and fear war on his face. "Do I have to go back?" he asked. "To that classroom?" "You're going to have a new teacher," Maria said gently. "Ms. Flores. Principal Thompson says she's wonderful. What if the other kids ask why I changed classes?" "We'll help you figure out what to say," Daniel assured him. "But Leo, I need you to understand something. What happened to you is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. And you never have to hide something like this from us again. Ever. Do you understand?" Leo nodded, but his eyes were still uncertain. The wound was deep. It would take more than one conversation to heal. The next Monday, Leo walked into Ms. Flores's classroom. He was nervous, his stomach in knots, his hand tight in his mother's. Ms. Flores was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a warm smile. When she saw Leo, she knelt down to his level. "Leo, I'm so glad you're joining our class," she said, and there was something genuine in her voice that made him look up. "I heard you're really interested in history. That's wonderful. We're going to have a great time learning together." "Really?" Leo's voice was small. "Really," she promised. "And I want you to know something. In this classroom, everyone is valued. Every voice matters. Every student deserves to be heard and respected. Always. It was a simple statement, but Leo heard what she was really saying. You're safe here. The first few days were hard. Leo was quiet, hesitant to participate, watching and waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Ms. Flores was patient. She'd call on him gently, praise his answers warmly, encourage his questions. Slowly, very slowly, Leo started to relax. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Leo joined her class, Ms. Flores asked if he'd stay after for a moment. Leo's heart jumped. Was he in trouble? But her smile was reassuring. Leo, she said when the other students had left, I've been watching you, and I can see how smart you are. How thoughtful. I also know that you've been through something really difficult. Leo looked down at his shoes. I want to ask you something, but you can say no if you want to. Okay. He nodded. You know what empathy is? Understanding how other people feel. Yeah, I think you have a lot of empathy. I think maybe because of what you went through, you understand what it feels like when someone makes you feel like you don't belong. Am I right? Leo nodded again, this time looking up at her. What if, Ms. Flores said slowly, we used that empathy for something good? What if we started a club here at school, focused on making sure everyone feels welcome? Everyone feels like they belong. We could call it the Everyone Belongs Club. And you could help me run it. Leo blinked. Me? Run a club? Why not? You know better than most kids how important it is. How much it matters. Would you want to think about it? For the first time in weeks, Leo felt something stir inside him. Not quite the old excitement, not yet. But something. A small spark of purpose. Can I ask my parents? Of course. That night, Leo told his parents about Ms. Flores's idea. Maria and Daniel looked at each other over his head, and Maria's eyes filled with tears. Their boy, who'd been so hurt, was being given a chance to turn that pain into something meaningful. What do you think, buddy? Daniel asked. Do you want to do it? Leo thought for a long moment. Ms. Granger made me feel really small. Like I didn't matter. Like I didn't belong. I know, baby, Maria said softly. Maybe, Leo said slowly. Maybe I could help other kids not feel that way. Maybe I could help them feel like they do belong. Daniel pulled his son into a hug. That, he said, his voice rough with emotion, is the bravest thing I've ever heard. The Everyone Belongs Club started small. 5 kids, meeting once a week after school in Ms. Flores's classroom. At first, Leo wasn't sure what they'd even do. But Ms. Flores helped them brainstorm. They made kindness cards, little notes that said things like, you're awesome, or you belong here, and left them in other students' lockers. They created a buddy bench for the playground where anyone who felt lonely could sit, and other students would come ask them to play. They organized a cultural celebration day where students could share their family traditions with the class. Word spread. Other students wanted to join. By December, the Everyone Belongs Club had 15 members. By February, it had grown to 30. The club's activities became woven into the fabric of Maplewood Elementary. Teachers started incorporating their messages into lessons. The principal mentioned them at assemblies. And Leo, quiet, hurt Leo who'd hidden an essay at the bottom of his backpack and carried pain in silence. Leo was at the center of it all. Not as a victim anymore. As a leader. Ms. Granger never came back to Maplewood Elementary. The school board, after reviewing the evidence and consulting with their legal team, terminated her employment. It wasn't a decision they made lightly, but it was one they made definitively. The message was clear. Racism had no place in their schools. In March, Principal Thompson asked Leo if he'd be willing to speak at an all-school assembly about the Everyone Belongs Club. Leo was terrified at first. Speaking in front of the whole school? Hundreds of kids and teachers? But his parents encouraged him. You have something important to say, Daniel told him. And people need to hear it. The day of the assembly, Leo stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces. His hands were shaking. His voice wavered when he started to speak. But then he found his parents in the crowd, Maria and Daniel sitting in the back, and he remembered why he was doing this. My name is Leo Martinez, he said, his voice getting stronger. And I want to tell you about something that happened to me this year. Something that hurt a lot. The gymnasium went quiet. Leo told them about his essay, about working hard, about being excited. He didn't go into all the details, didn't repeat the cruel words, but he told them enough. Someone made me feel like I didn't belong here, he said. Like who I am wasn't good enough. And for a while I believed them. I stopped liking school. I stopped liking myself. You could have heard a pin drop. But then I learned something important. When someone tries to make you feel small, you have a choice. You can stay small, or you can stand up. Not just for yourself, but for other people who feel small too. He talked about Ms. Flores, about the club, about how hurt can become healing if you let it. Everyone belongs here, Leo said, and now his voice rang out clear and strong. Everyone. No matter what you look like, where your family comes from, what language you speak at home, or anything else. You belong. And if someone tries to tell you different, they're wrong. Not you. Them. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But what Leo would remember most wasn't the clapping. It was the kids who came up to him afterward, one by one, to thank him. To tell him their own stories of feeling left out, of being treated unfairly, of being hurt. To say that his words mattered. A girl named Jasmine, who'd been teased for her accent, hugged him and whispered, "Thank you." A boy named David, who used a wheelchair and got left out of playground games, shook his hand and said, "I want to join your club." One by one, Leo was discovering what his father had tried to teach him all along. That standing up to injustice, that turning pain into purpose, that believing everyone deserves dignity. These weren't just abstract ideas in history books. They were real. They were powerful. They could change things. By the end of the school year, the Everyone Belongs Club had become something bigger than anyone had imagined. Other schools in the district heard about it and wanted to start their own chapters. Local news ran a story about Leo and the movement he'd started. The district superintendent came to visit, to shake Leo's hand, to thank him for reminding everyone what schools were supposed to be about. On the last day of third grade, Ms. Flores pulled Leo aside one more time. "Do you remember that first day you came to my class?" she asked. "How nervous you were." Leo nodded. "Look at you now," she said, her eyes bright with pride. "You've changed this school, Leo. You've changed lives. Mine included." "I just wanted to help," Leo said. "That's exactly it," Ms. Flores said. "You just wanted to help. That's what heroes do." That evening, the Martinez family had a quiet dinner together. Just the three of them, like it had been before all of this started. But everything was different now. "How does it feel?" Daniel asked Leo. "The school year being over?" Leo thought about it. "Good," he said finally. "Really good." Maria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Mijo. So proud." "Me too, buddy," Daniel added. "You took something terrible and made it into something beautiful. That takes courage." Leo smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. The spark was back. Not exactly the same as before. What he'd been through had changed him, had given him an understanding of pain and injustice that he wouldn't have chosen. But in its place was something deeper. Stronger. A sense of purpose. "Dad," Leo said quietly, "remember those books we got from the library? About the civil rights leaders?" "Of course. They stood up even when it was scary, right? Even when people were mean to them." "That's right. I think I understand now," Leo said. "Why it mattered. Why they kept going." Daniel's eyes got misty. This was his son, his 8-year-old son, grasping concepts that some adults never understood. "Tell me," Daniel said softly. "Because if they didn't stand up, nothing would change. And even though standing up is hard, and sometimes it hurts, it's worth it. Because everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Everyone deserves to belong." Maria was crying now, but they were good tears. Proud tears. "Yeah, buddy," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly right." Later that night, after Leo had gone to bed, Daniel and Maria sat on the porch, watching fireflies light up the darkness. "He's going to be okay," Maria said. "Better than okay." "He is," Daniel agreed. "He took the worst thing that could have happened to him and turned it into something that helped hundreds of other kids. That's remarkable." "That teacher tried to break him," Maria said, her voice hard. "She tried to make him feel worthless. And instead," Daniel said quietly, "she accidentally taught him the most important lesson of all. That injustice exists, but it doesn't have to win. That pain can become purpose. That one person, even a kid, even an 8-year-old third grader, can make a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. "Do you think he knows?" Maria asked finally. "How special he is?" "I think he's starting to," Daniel said. "And we'll spend the rest of our lives making sure he never forgets." Inside, Leo lay in his bed, unable to sleep yet. He was thinking about next year, 4th grade, about continuing the club, about the new kids who'd join. He was thinking about Ms. Flores and how she'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. He was thinking about his parents, about how they'd fought for him, stood up for him, shown him what it meant to demand justice. And he was thinking about that essay, the one that had started everything. He'd never thrown it away. It was in his desk drawer now, smoothed out and placed in a new folder. Not because he wanted to remember the pain, but because he wanted to remember what came after. The standing up, the speaking out, the changing things. Someday, Leo thought, he'd show that essay to other kids who felt hurt or small, or like they didn't belong. He'd show them the cruel words, yes, but more importantly, he'd show them what happened next. How he didn't stay silent. How his parents fought for him. How he turned his pain into a movement. He'd show them that everyone belongs. And that standing up, even when you're scared, even when you're just one person, even when you're only 8 years old, standing up matters. In the darkness of his room, Leo smiled. Tomorrow was summer vacation. Next year was 4th grade. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. And this time, when Leo thought about school, he didn't feel fear. He felt hope, because he'd learned the most important lesson of all, that hurt can become healing, that victims can become leaders, and that standing up to injustice, really standing up, with courage and conviction and community, can change everything. The spark that Ms. Granger had tried to extinguish? It was burning brighter than ever before. Leo Martinez's story reminds us that the most powerful response to hatred is not more hatred, but action. It's standing up. It's speaking out. It's taking pain and transforming it into purpose. Every person who's ever faced discrimination, who's ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been hurt by someone who should have protected them, they have a choice. They can carry that pain silently, or they can use their voice to change things. Leo chose to use his voice. And in doing so, he reminded an entire school that everyone, absolutely everyone, belongs. What will you choose?